talk about another part of the identity part of the brain, sometimes called the MNS, or the mirror neuron system. Say that 10 times fast. So in a healthy developing brain, or a typically developing brain, introduce us to what mirror neurons are, how that is important for identity and group formation, and then I'll ask a question. What if that system is offline or not working quite typically?
Yeah, well, mirror neurons are sort of our built-in capacity to perceive or respond to the world. So there's some things in the world that we just don't respond to, radio waves, for instance, things like that. But there's, um, you know, relationship patterns that might be very important for amoebas that we don't pay any attention to because they don't matter to us. So we've got this built-in response, but we don't know it's there until someone triggers it. So, it was discovered by realizing that, by studying monkeys that were watching other monkeys eat had some of the same responses in their brain that the monkeys that were eating were, even though they were not getting the food, but they recognized the response, that sort of thing. And so one of the ways that we find our identity is that somebody awakens us in it. We have a response to what they're doing. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that makes me feel something. Oh, that gives a reaction inside me. It awakens it. So that's really the process by which we discover our identities. We have things in life that awaken a response in us and go like, ooh, I want more of this, or in some cases less of it. So if that mirror response is up and running very well, we're very responsive to the environment around us and the things that fit our identity, and we sort of disregard the ones that don't. If the mirror neuron system isn't responding, we can't really discover that would have been important to me.
And so the mirror neurons, kind of, when we talk about role modeling and kind of picking up again, what's going on right here? How do you play duck, duck, goose? How do you get involved in this game in recess? How do you have conversations? How do you find a group? How do you, all the different kind of social rules that are just kind of we pick up on. So having an active mirror neuron system is pretty important to that.
Yeah, we're noticing the important interactions that we want to be a part of, and they resonate with us. We sort of learn them vicariously, you might say. So we learn a lot from watching other people's experience if the mirror neurons are up, and we feel like, yeah, I can relate to that.
So one thing that I was reflecting on the other day, so our daughter Sydney is our foray into this, into autism, back when autism was only a boy thing and not a girl thing. So 20 years ago, we're kind of fighting the fight. She gets diagnosed. I was fighting the public school system. I was like, she has to have social skills curriculum. She must have a social skills curriculum. What are we doing to develop social skills? And because her IQ was pushing 150, her grades weren't suffering. They're like, she's fine. She'll pick up on it. I'm like, she's not picking up on it. So I homeschooled her for a year, and I got a bunch of social skill books. I think Jed Baker was one of the authors that I picked up on social skills, but I was kind of doing all these things, and we're role playing and practicing and all of that. And so kind of throughout motherhood with her, like certain little books like The Pokey Little Puppy, right? I might be reading the book and go, oh, I remember when my mom read this to me, or my favorite teacher read this book to me. And so we're reading the social skills book, and she looks up at me with her big blue eyes. She's about 6 years old. And she's like, do you remember when your mommy read this book to you? And I was like, well, my mommy didn't read this book to me. And just the shock on her face. And she's like, how do you people learn these things then? How did you learn this without a book? I mean, it was just real. How did this happen? Like this is too much information, because we'd have to review it. We'd have to go entering a conversation, exiting a conversation, asking to play. How do you ask to play? How do you know if somebody wants to play? There's all these different little social rules that she had no clue about. But when we were working on a book and she was writing her story, this is where my question comes in about some of my theory. When she was in school and she wasn't really interacting on the playground with the other kids, what she was more interested in was going around the perimeter of the playground and picking up purple weeds or purple flowers and making bouquets for her teachers. So she'd spend her whole time alone and solitary picking up things for her teachers who, if she liked the teacher, and then presenting them with their little bouquet of weeds before they would go back into school, and then kind of go back into the classroom. And then the classroom, of course, is very structured, right, and versus playground. And so if an autistic child, and she's female, and so you said the corpus callosum can be affected a little bit differently in males and females. So even for her, a female, she wasn't picking up on all these social things. So an autistic child, especially they're not diagnosed, what could be happening here in this identity formation when they're not interacting with their peers or don't have a peer group in their elementary years on how to form some of these basic social communications?
Well, the risk is that when you go through the apoptotic period and you haven't already been using certain systems, the brain is more inclined to trim them out. So one of the things that they found, for instance, is that children that don't learn self-quieting, when they go through the apoptotic period, the self-quieting systems get trimmed at a rate about 10 times more severely than they do for the children who have gotten more practice early on. So there's this idea, if you wait too long, the brain will decide we don't need it and make it more difficult to acquire later on. So this timely application is important. And, the intensification of hormones makes it sort of critical to figure out how to do things. Let me give you an example from early on. The second year of life, you're supposed to learn how to handle the 6 unpleasant emotions that are sort of wired into the right brain. If you learn them in the first 6 months, 12 months to 18 months, you have a pretty easy time doing them because your limbic system hasn't myelinated yet. The emotions are there, but they're not very intense. About age 16 months to 18 months, your limbic system myelinates, and then you go from being just a little bit irritated or angry to a rage. And so if you haven't learned how to handle anger while it was tiny, and now suddenly it becomes a rage, now you've got a real problem on your hand to try to handle it. And that's why a lot of the tantrums and things at age 2 happen, because it's like, whoa, it didn't seem like much of a problem before. We sort of ignored it. Now it's a big problem. And so, again, the social things, they're a little bit annoying during the childhood phase if they're not working right. But then you hit adolescence, suddenly they're big annoyances. The skills there that would say, oh, well, this is big, but I can handle it, haven't been developed. And so, again, timely training really reduces the intensity of problems later on when the brain gets into more intense levels of functioning. So it's much easier to learn to relate to others before you've been hurt with others a whole bunch, is another way of saying it.
Okay, so that's one of the things I wanted to kind of run past you as I've been thinking about this lately, because in kind of autism theory, there is what they call the broken mirror neuron theory, that something is kind of going awry in this system. The article I pulled up this morning by Chan and Han, 2020 Molecular Autism Journal, said what's happening is hyperactivation in the right inferior frontal gyrus. The autistic brain is working harder to process social emotional information, which makes difficulties in social interactions difficult, delayed processing, making it very difficult to perceive accurately the intention of others. So part of the academic article said, if the autistic person is observing social, emotional, heightened emotions in somebody else that's not an interaction with me, it tends to be okay. But once that interaction involves me in it, or somehow I'm being accused or blamed or perceived of something, that's when things can go awry. So it might not be, quote, a broken mirror neuron system, but it doesn't seem to work consistently. When I'm, say, watching a movie about two people who are having a conflict, I might be able to pick out what's happening between the two people out there. But once it's here and it's between me and you, that hyperactivation, because of the right inferior frontal gyrus, causes a lot of inaccuracy in perceiving what the intention of the other person was, which would then cause a huge social emotional communication problem. So my wonderings and thoughts were, if especially with a lot of people we work with, let's say, um, back in the days when we said high functioning autism, Asperger's, or now it's level 1, we usually have a person who biologically is actually hitting their developmental markers pretty well, might even be exceptional in their intelligence and cognition. So left brain seems to be doing fine, but where the social emotional development tends to be 30 to 40% below their biological age. So always kind of operating at a younger brain with a higher capacity of knowledge. And so I'm wondering, as I'm thinking, if you're kind of going through elementary school and you're always the smart kid and you're always being praised for being the smart kid and you're not really encouraged in a lot of social, and then you get to middle school when now neurotypical brains are like, who's my people, who's my herds, and we're going to select this person out of our herd because they don't seem to be like us. And now maybe there's isolation of that person, bullying of that person, exclusion of that person. And so maybe even the autistic person's like, fine, I like astronomy better than you anyway. I'll just put more into my study and I'll become a PhD in astronomy. What are some things that have happened relationally then, because of not having those interactions, maybe not having the multi-generational community? I've put all my time in logic and learning more knowledge, more achievement. I'm a PhD. I have two PhDs. Heck, I've gotten a Nobel Prize. What might that do to that relational communication development system at that point?
Well, here's where different brain models have different ways of looking at it. Most of the research out there is what I call sort of a modular system. It's like this module is out, like the mirror neuron system, is on or off or something like that. And when you're doing brain scans, you can check and see that that's the case, or hyperactivated. Alan Shore, which is the model that I follow, actually has a sequential model. Now, I don't think your listeners can actually see what we're doing here, right? This is just an audio podcast.
If you look on YouTube, then you'll be able to see it on YouTube.
All right. Well, I'll hold up my plastic brain right here. But in a sequential model, you have the right brain passing information forward, going from the back to the front like this. The hyperactivation happens that they're talking about here in the prefrontal gyrus. Also, what Dr. Daniel Amen in his study would call the anterior cingulate. That's actually where we coordinate our activities, minds, and emotional states with other people. But what he's found out is the hyperactivation isn't actually a case of it's working hard. It's a matter of that part of the brain is actually cramped up. So it's not passing the signals forward to the mirror neuron section down here. So as it's going forward, it hits this area of hyperactivation. The signals don't get past that point. So the mirror neuron system hasn't gone offline. It stopped getting input. Just like we were talking a little while ago, if the passage from the right brain to the left brain is small or cut off, the information isn't getting past that point, or very little of it is. It's not actually giving the mirror neuron system a chance to get input. It's frozen up along the way. And so what Daniel Amen found with the anterior cingulate and his SPECT scans is you actually have to deactivate that part. You have to lower the level until it gets back into a working range. Because, your muscles get too tight, they go into a cramp, you can't use them. So you'd scan them and go, whoa, that muscle's very active. Yeah, it's useless. And the brain, when it gets too active, if it gets too far spread, we call it a seizure. And people in a seizure don't actually think very well. So you actually have to quiet that part of the brain, which has gotten too much input. And what the brain does to do that, in some cases, if it has the possibility, is that way back here at the amygdala level, it basically has the person dissociate. It says, okay, we're shutting that system down. It's overloading. No point in sending it more information. And sometimes autistic behavior can look a little dissociated. Like, yeah, that whole system just shut itself down. It's like, oh, that overheated badly. So when we're thinking, they're not getting input, they're actually getting too much input. And bright people have a particular proneness to have, too much input coming in too fast, and they, it overloads the system. And you add hormones to that, the overload just becomes more intense. So now we dissociate and go like, well, what can I do in my own world by myself that isn't so noisy, disruptive, overwhelming? And to do that, we find something to focus on. So, we focus on what we can manage and what we can do well with. And so this kind of over-focused, I can notice every purple plant in the place, but the other stuff, all that noisy stuff happening over there, that's a little overwhelming for me. So I'm not going to overwhelm myself. Well, I'll stay in a quieter environment. How does that fit back into your theory when we put it into a sequence instead of a module?
Back to your question, that was kind of thing I wanted to kind of talk through because I speak on this a lot and wanted to talk to an expert on brain development before I keep saying things like that. But back to marriage, back to what we were talking about. What was your question?
I don't know, 10 minutes plus ago, you mentioned the observability factor, that you don't necessarily know how you feel until you've blown up, volume went to 120 decibels. That would kind of be the same thing, I think. And if it's not true, then say so. Of I am on the playground and I am picking all the purple flowers. This is, what are the things that are not like the others kind of idea. So if you're looking for a tell, and maybe at that young of an age, you don't have that third person perspective of who you are and what you're doing compared to whatever's going on around you. But as an adult, you might be able to develop something if you can't feel it, because the way you expressed that linear movement through the brain, that seems like a very difficult thing to hover over and recognize, I feel hyperactivated right in my whatever that thing was called. Maybe I should take an alternate course of action. But what I possibly could do is pay attention to my actions and see if they're congruous with the situation around me.
Yeah, that's in fact one of the ways of coping with it. Yeah, I mean, tell you the truth, the brain was not particularly designed for observing itself. It's designed for looking at the world and predicting what's coming next. And not, if you spend an awful lot of time observing yourself, you are going to have trouble if you're out there trying to deal with lions, bears, tigers, and people. So, to be able to say, well, there's two things. One, your brain can use its predictive abilities to say, this is the kind of situation where I'm going to have this kind of trouble. But to do that, we have to have some people who are willing to have the conversation with us in an encouraging kind of a way. The brain actually will develop ways of dealing with things if it's being encouraged, like, oh, that was a good try. Didn't work, but it was a good try. If it's told, oh, you're a failure, and it didn't work, um, it's really hard for the brain to go like, I'm going to keep trying at this. And so having this way in which we can quietly observe the problems and go like, well, there's something that we predict is going to be difficult to manage, but we can observe the signs. We can use the nice sequential left brain to say, well, what sort of procedures would I want to do, or how would I analyze it, or how will I deal with these signs? As a matter of fact, even within something like prayer healing, we find that if people read their journaling out loud, the parts of our brain that read and write are very limited, but reading it out loud distributes it through our ears into all kinds of different parts of our brain that go like, oh, now that I hear that, I have this reaction to it. I have this thought. We get it out of the brain's specialized circuits into a broader discussion. And some of that, if we can include other people, teaches our brain, yeah, we can talk about, observe my patterns and discuss them with other people. It could actually bring about some helpful things. So yeah, there are workarounds. If we're in a neutral to encouraging environment, when we're in a hostile and critical environment, our brain says, don't try that. It'll just get worse.
All right, that brings me to my last question, and we could do a whole podcast on this. But in the Christian community, we hear a lot of the word accountability partner, accountability groups. So somebody has a behavior, a situation, a point of growth that needs to happen. And so usually the go-to is you need an accountability partner. You need someone that's going to point it out, and someone's going to hold you accountable, show you when you're doing that wrong, hold your feet to the fire, make you confess it. What's the difference between accountability like that and what you refer to as a community of healthy correction? How would you differentiate that?
Yeah, well, accountability came out of two things. One is the voluntarism, which philosophical thought that got into theology, and that is the only part of human beings that can be saved is their will. So you got to make them make better choices. And so if we get an accountability partner, we have somebody who will, make you make the right choices again next time, because you'll be at least afraid of telling your accountability partner. That's sort of a fear-based system. And the problem with fear is it fades as fast as it can. We don't like fear. And so the brain says, well, I just won't tell them, or, we're trying to get out of a bad situation. The other thing was that because accountability wasn't really working, and it's been tried a few times, and it has an immediate short-term effect, then it fades. The coaching movement kind of came in and said, well, we're going to coach people by holding them accountable. So the coaching movement actually sort of predicted failure, but says, well, we're going to encourage you to keep doing it. And that sort of mixed a little bit of encouragement. We got somebody who can at least talk to, and they'll say, well, you failed, but let's try it again. And so in that way, accountability has had a little bit better success when it's a coach who encourages you to go back and try it again. When it's the accountability, we're just going to help you make better choices, that tends to peter out very quickly. And so it's even the accountability thing is mixed. But if we were actually going to talk about mirror neurons, who is the person who's going to help you discover what God built in you and encourage that to grow? And now we've got to get your mirror neurons online, which means I can't be overwhelming you with emotion. We have to be in a quiet, encouraging space where we're looking for what God is growing in you. And every time it happens, we smile on that event.
So, okay, how do I want to form this last thing? So, something that we would say we encounter a lot in the couples that we work with is the wife is expecting, okay, you just got your autism diagnosis. You now know how your brain is working differently. I want you to do A, B, C, go. And I need this to happen by next week or next month. So go get an accountability partner, go get a coach. And if you don't do this, then you have a character or a sin problem. So I'm sending you to Dan. You've been working with him 3 months and you have not changed his behavior yet. You are not being more kind. You are not being more social. You are not having deeper emotions with me yet. So therefore, this is a sin or a character problem. You're just not working hard enough. Would you kind of address that?
Yeah, well, I'll address it two ways. One is what that article that you were talking about with the hyperactivation in the what would be the anterior cingulate or the prefrontal gyrus. What that actually does is it keeps you from being able to observe yourself until after the fact. You do not learn from the consequences of your actions when that's hyperactivated. You're hurt by the consequences of your actions. You can feel afterwards like, I'm really sorry for how I hurt you with what I did. But your brain does not learn to anticipate that in a way that'll change it next time. The anticipation circuits are the ones that are frozen up in there. So it's really very peculiar. You see the person feeling hurt. They're sorry for what happened, but that doesn't seem to help them to learn from it. I don't know if that's registering with examples in your mind, but the person feels it afterwards, but they don't learn anything about anticipating and stopping it because it's the anticipation circuits that freeze up. So this ability to say, well, I'm going to learn from that and change is, well, I'll learn from that, but it doesn't help me change is really peculiar. That's one thing. The second thing is that real change in the brain, like memory circuits, they grow at body speeds. Your memory circuits change over the process of months, not minutes. So being able to think something differently does not mean we can do something differently. The growth of a new pattern is going to take a long time because you've got to grow different nerves. You got to grow different pathways. You got to grow all of these things, and they don't grow if they're being harassed. Then anything that brings stress, your brain goes through at night, creates cortisol, and erases the progress during the day because it ended badly. And it ended badly on a 24-hour basis. It's like, no, that ended up stressful. Don't try that again. And so you're dissolving new growth unless you have this encouraging and patient development that says, okay, you're going to have to grow whole new systems in your brain, and we're going to have some patient endurance, another good Christian value, by the way, while that happens. And see you as the person God means you to be while your brain doesn't yet know how to act that way. When you're desperate, as many partners are, they need their own support group to help them deal with their desperation while you create time for the brain to grow whole new things, which if it was very good at growing them, it would have grown them to begin with. So we're sort of actually trying to till a field here that's not easy to grow. And, that's not easy to live with, but it's how I see the problem.
Okay. We could keep going forever, couldn't we? So what I just heard you say is a complete validation of what I started noticing when we would start working with a couple, specifically after diagnosis, is that couple should not immediately do a couple work because the two brains are at different spaces. They're in different developmental spaces. There's different social emotional capabilities. So we start them separate, men and women, to do their own thing. Maybe the wife is in a grief, lament, needs support. What does all this mean stage? And the man, specifically, if we're talking about that combination, is in an identity. What's me? What's autism? What's my brain? What's a strength? What's not me phase? And that's not a space to be doing marital work in. And then the second thing that I've become very adamant in is, particularly starting in 2026, if you're not in a group, we're not working with you. So you have got to, unless there are extenuating circumstances because of a time zone, if you're not willing to be in community or in a group, learning the skill and learning together in community, We just have not seen a lot of progress with one-offs coming to coaching 6 off and on when you feel like it, when there's a problem, crisis to crisis. If you're not in a community learning together and growing together in an iron sharpening iron encouraging way, you're not ready to do marriage work. And if you don't understand how your brain works, but you just expect the person to try harder, do harder, be accountable, just do the thing I told you to do, it's insanity. You're doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
Yeah,
And
it's not going to work. And what I would say is if you're less than 12 years old, one-on-one work is very commendable. That's what your brain wants to relate to another person. After age 12, survival of my people is more important than my own. I take input from my people in a way that I won't take from any individual. So if you actually want change, the brain is waiting to have a group help you with that change. It's not wired to have an individual make that change for you. One of the reasons why couples trying to talk with each other don't get good change. It's like, I'm not changing for you as an individual. But if a group says, oh, this is how we handle it, your brain goes, well, really? I want to take that in. I want to become like the group. So if you're fighting that, another problem with narcissism, which we've talked about briefly, it doesn't respond one-on-one very well. But in a group, it's like, oh, I'll change to become like my group. And that's how it's wired to work. So let's go with the wiring. That's exactly what you're saying. Trying to do this one-on-one is just fighting the brain's wiring all the way along after age 12.
I feel so good about my resolution that we will be doing group work first before we do marital work. Our brain needs to change and mature and learn some things before we just start trying harder and throwing new information at it. So
let's teach
awesome.
the brain the way the brain likes to learn, and it'll work a lot better. Yeah, I'm all for it.
Yay. Well, anything you want to say as we're closing?
No, I don't want to muddy up what we just did.
Okay. All right. Well, as always, thank you so much for being on the show, Jim. We always learn things and love processing through things with you.
You've got a great month coming up too. You've got some great guests to add on to this, all kinds of color and additional detail. So I hope people stays with your whole podcast series.
Me too, because we worked hard to put it together, right?
Some of those were difficult challenges.
Yes, some were very hard to get on there. Well, as we like first of all, since this is October, go to our website, www.holmesasr.com, look up group coaching. New groups should be forming this one. We don't know what we're going to call it yet, but it's going to be our new group based on all the material that I just told you. And it's all the things of stages of maturity. We're going into a much deeper dive. This is just an introduction to the class that we'll be doing January through April of 2026. So please look for that. It's going to fill fast. Like when we had enemy mode registration, and it didn't start till August 5th. It was full mid-July when we to do escaping enemy mode actually in your marriage. So as we end today, we remind our listeners that
you're not alone on your journey.
And there's hope for your future.